Hey, it's Professor Diffley. This is History of Springfield, History 114. This is Module 2, Lecture Video 4. So last time I left off here saying we're going to move on to the story of the Pocumtuck oral tradition. Again, remember just the notes to take a look in the notes sections. And here, it says receive required videos here, this one, and there's a PDF and a audio file if you want to hear it spoken. By Native Americans from the region, and they're speaking the story. It's sometimes stories are one thing to read and then have more power when they're heard. So your choice on there, but they're both there. But the people of the Beaver Hill Tale. Let's look in this. So again, remember, one of the things we were talking about here is that it's quite possible that Paleo Indians and the witnessed Lake Hitchcock and its draining, and we see this here in a story of the Pocumtuck, arguably their oldest oral tradition that has survived down to European contact and beyond, is about all the way up the Beaver Hill Tale, and this is up by Sunderland, Deerfield area above north of Amherst, and this would be Mount Sugarloaf there. And so, in the short story, you can read you have to read and make sure to read the story. But in Pocumtuck, the story is essentially by work of a giant beaver, right? So this is how they explain it. And remember, a lot of oral traditions of ancient peoples anywhere help them understand the natural world, right? This is how they understood it. These are the stories. So to them, the story is there was a giant beaver who built a dam, essentially flooded the valley. A sort of godlike, almost being, stopped the beaver, turned it into a stone, right? Crushed it and killed it. And this outline is supposed to look like a beaver with its tail and all that in the head. Now, a couple things. His body becomes the mountain range, what we call the Pocumtuck range, and his head is Wigwamps, what is now known as Mount Sugarloaf, which you could actually drive up there past UMass. You keep going, and there's you can actually drive up to the top and walk up, and you get a beautiful view of the river and the surrounding valley up there. If you've ever been up there going towards Deerfield, you can see it. It's a nice little state park. Definitely worth a check out. It's got a cool little lookout you can walk up to. Just really nice place. But yeah, that is part of it. Now, some of this, and again, I remember I said talking about notes and stuff like that. So just let me again reiterate that here. This shares similarities with the geological evidence. Remember when I said oral traditions, they can be changed. You can't always trust everything in them. They're not to be taken verbatim as but there are some similarities, right? There was a giant dam that had filled up the valley, right? The giant beaver story to us sounds crazy. Beavers are tiny, the animal's tiny. But here, there were such things like this. There is evidence of what we would consider huge animals living in this area, including beavers. They're what often called megafauna, right? Fauna and flora and fauna, you probably heard of that before. Flora denotes plant life, fauna is animal life. Mega meaning big, right? Gigantic. And megafauna that did exist in the Pleistocene epoch, including in what is now the Connecticut River Valley. Think of a megafauna as a woolly mammoth or something like that. But these things did happen there. And so, now, to look at it this way, this story seems to tell the story of a giant lake being here one day, and then, the valley was flooded, and then it drained and opened up the entire valley. Now, how do you explain that, right? Especially if they're up here towards Mount Sugarloaf, how can they know what's going down in Rocky Hill, right? I mean, that's so far away. There's no news, that sort of thing. So this helps them explain and understand the world. But you can see, right, what we consider a mythology, a myth, oral tradition, does seem to have some evidence in fact, right? And so, read the story. It's a pretty cool story nonetheless. And so, okay, so that is is this, and they call themselves the people of the Beaver Tail Hill. That is a part of what the people that are in the Pocumtuck called themselves, right? The Beaver Tail Hill. As I said, you can see there in the back the tail. All right, so ancient human settling of the Connecticut Valley. Well, you talk about, and this is from one of the in course content I had there's a little folder says these are some resources we're going to use over and over. One is a 1704 Deerfield raid on Deerfield site where we get a lot of information for Native Americans. Another is one about Springfield, our plural history. Starting on January 1st, I think all web browsers don't do Flash. So the link is there. Some people can still get it to work, some cannot. Don't worry, I provide it all when we need it as PDFs and things like that. But this is another one. This is about a really great book about this region, and a digital version that we can access. And there's a folder and links, and I'll take out images and stuff in there. And this gives a really good, concise, and you could blow it up, enlarge it on your screens. You could read what's on there and that. But I give you the important information. But you can see this sort of a story here, going from the Paleo Indians, the early Archaic, all the way up to King Philip's War, is really where this goes to in the 17th century. But you can see, and this will be, distribution of settlements and things like that. But this is one of those resources. Make sure to take a look at it. I'll tell you when you're supposed to use it. We'll especially use it in really through Module 2, I think, into Module 3 is we'll be using this. But don't worry, that'll be noted in the module assignment. So again, the settling of the Americas, the first Americans, and the Beringia theory. I'll talk about why it's a theory. We've talked about this before in the previous video. But again, the idea is, the theory is that they came across Beringia people and settled the Americas, right? And you can see in the different areas, and this comes up to here to where we're going to be the Mohawk, Oneida, and others, and then all the way down into South America. This is the view. Now, why do I say it's a theory? Well, again, as I mentioned before, a scientist always, and hedge our bets. Even historians, even though it's not a science, it's more of an art. When we say this is what happened, it's based on all the evidence we have, right? And as I mentioned before, we're always finding new things, and so far the evidence is this is the most likely way people got here. There's evidence for Beringia. There were other land bridges, so to speak, and connected Asia to Australia, New Zealand, the Philippines. So we know this all existed. Now, why do we say they came here? Well, it follows this track of what we believe they came. And this was originally where we found, researchers have found the oldest settlements, right? And so that's what it says. Well, then this evidence points to, well, that must be the way it happened, because this is where all, we found this is the oldest human remains and settlements, and everything else we're finding is after that. Well, things have begun to change, and challenges to Beringia theory in really some of this has been the past year or so, and the past few years, is increasingly they're finding, not just on the coast, but in other areas out here, and also right on the coast in some other places, settlements and evidence of human habitation that are nearly as old, if not older, than Beringia. So it makes it now, historians and others are starting to go back and revise this, right? Maybe people came here earlier. Maybe this happened earlier than we thought. The Beringia theory is one argument being made. Another is, well, maybe there were multiple waves of humans coming over to the Americas. Could have been Beringia, but we know, and they've found evidence again in the past couple decades, of Polynesian groups. So Polynesians are the people that live in the islands in the Pacific, so think Hawaii and things like that. We know their boats can make it here. Their ancient boats could make it here. They've actually proven this. They've rebuilt them the same way they would, using the same materials, and have crossed the Pacific. Was it easy? Of course not. But there is a story, so maybe they came over. I mean, we know the Vikings made it to North America well before Columbus or anything like that. So why couldn't these other people too? So maybe that's how it was. But maybe they were like the Vikings and they never came in great enough numbers to settle permanently. But these are all things that are, being debated, and as more evidence arises, that will either solidify the Beringia theory or create new explanations for it. But right now, this is what we know as the Beringia theory. But remember, with history, it's all about interpretation of the facts, right? Analysis, right? Not just opinions, which don't really matter because they're just taste, right? Analysis of that is what is it based on, right? What's the evidence? Think of a court case. How do you prove a case? The overwhelming evidence says this, and that's what convinces you. And so that's where we are. It's still Beringia. So now we're talking now the humans are here. We'll start getting there later. You're going to have the origins of food production. Like I said, this is where I was talking about Mesopotamia in the Neolithic Revolution earlier, you can see there are going to be different eras of where human food production starts. The eastern woodlands coming up towards even into the Northeast were later to discover or learn how to grow food, agriculture. But you see it here, evidence going back as far as 8,000 BCE and this is sorry, I didn't mean to go backwards. Right, Mesoamerica, 8,000 BCE, maize, squash, eastern woodlands, maize being corn, and you can see all the different foods that they grew in there. From squash to palm, jams. And the Andes Mountains down here, llama, potatoes, and guinea pigs. And that is the one area where they actually, well, we'll talk about that. Yeah, that was one of the animals that was, and don't think of a guinea pig you've maybe had as a class pet in kindergarten or first grade or something like that. We're talking about much larger animals and then what you're thinking of there. So when did it emerge in the Americas? Again, agriculture, slower transition. Why? Because it's different than in the Americas. The flora and fauna are significantly different, and that's why the foods are going to develop differently. And the animals. But one of the biggest things is you did not have draft animals and herding animals here. Well, very many of them, especially in draft animals, like think of an ox and a horse or something like that, that can pull a plow to clear a field. Those did not exist in the Americas. The Europeans brought all of those over. Pigs, as one of them, but think of cows, cattle, and horses. They did not exist. The biggest animal you had that could be tamed was a llama, and they're only in certain areas in the Andes. They are not really draft animals. They're actually very hard to herd too, because they're kind of very stubborn, very, very strong-willed animals in that. So without that, you do not, you had buffalo and deer, but you can't herd buffalo. No one's ever turned a buffalo into a draft animal to plow a field, right? Or a bison. So because of that, you're not going to have agriculture as much, or until later, to say the least here. Again, it's going to happen more slowly. Again, the view is that it developed slower in the Americas. There was lots of people, but compared to other, Eurasia, Europe and Asia, and even parts of Africa, there's much less people. So first evidence of true stone tools you begin to find more and more in the Tehuan Valley, which would be in Mexico at around 6,700 years ago before the Common Era. You begin to see plant domestication by about 5,000, where they start growing, corn and others. And one of the other things too, and this is true of the hunter-gatherers at all times too, there's lots of fishing and shell fishing along the coast, and that would be, along rivers. Chances are that's where most of the meat for hunter-gatherer groups, if they're around water, came from, because you're fishing with net fishing, things like that. The fish aren't going to kill you, where you could die hunting other animals. So that just makes sense too there. Again, why less here? So what did they domesticate here? That you could start to see plant experimentation. Why you could start to see them breeding different types of grains, right? Fossilized, right? So what they would do is they would, say a wild wheat grew or wild corn. They would plant the seeds, only of the, they would only plant seeds that gave off lots of, either grain in one way. And so the rest of them they would eat, turn into flour and that, but they would save the best to plant later. So you begin to see that's genetic modification. Humans have been doing that forever. You begin to see, the settle on really three main crops here. And it's what's called the three Native American main crops here, the three sisters, as it's often called. It's interesting, side note too, you'll find in the Mediterranean, they have three crops too. It's usually wheat, grapes, and olives that all went together. They worked together, and that has been the basis of the diet in that region for time, going back before the ancient Greeks. And so here, Native Americans, maize, squash, and beans. You probably heard this. Why? Maize is corn, right? You could turn it into, it is a grain. You could turn it into all sorts of foods, preserve it into flour, into other things. That squash grows on the ground. Corn stalks grow up. Beans, providing protein. That they grow up on, like a beanstalk, right? But it needs something to wrap around, and the corn is perfect for that, right? So it can grow up the corn. The squash is on the bottom, also, obviously good, nutritious in that, but it also protects the plant at the bottom. The Native Americans realized, and they're all across the Americas, that these three grown together are not going to deplete the soil. complement each other, provide enough food and sustenance, and really just work perfectly. Again, we've seen this in other places in the world where 2 or 3 crops are put together, so it's not surprising to find it here. Again, we talked about the lack of draft animals, and I mentioned the Andean hind where they eat guinea pigs or llamas for hauling. Again, this was a very balanced diet. Like I said, that's why they went together. That's why they still go together in that. Okay, so we will pick up here the true Native American settlement in lecture video 5.